Well, afternoon, everyone. We are seeing people start to come in, so thank you so much for joining us today. Really, without further ado, because we've only got an hour, I am going to be able to introduce our first speaker. So, Daisy, if you want to kind of turn your camera and your mic on. So, Daisy, when we caught up the other day, it was really great to not only chat but also to reminisce that actually, when Young Harrow Foundation first started, you were the person that sent the email from John Lyons to say, great news, you've got the funding, and Erik was signed. So both of you on this call today. You then went over to Henry Smith and now at Children in Need. So vast experience, not just with your new grants, but also obviously when we get to the Q&A. So we're looking forward to. And on that, as I hand over, please, if there's any questions people have got, please, there's a Q&A button at the bottom. If you please just put that question in there. And at the end of the two presentations, we will get to as many questions as we can. So Daisy, over to you to tell us all about what's happening at the Children in Need.
Great, thanks so much, Dan. And yeah, just let me know when you can see my presentation. Okay. All good? It's big and everything?
Yeah, everything's working perfect.
Cool. Okay, cool. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. As Dan said, I'm Daisy. I work in our grant-making team in London, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about the grants that we've got available at the moment, for 2020, the round at the moment that you can apply for and are live at the moment. So just in terms of what we will talk about today, so I'm just going to talk about some of our aims and some of our key principles for this grant round, some of the practicalities about eligibility, dates, things like that. And then, yes, definitely we'll try and answer as many questions as possible, but I'll also give you my contact details at the end. So if there's any questions that we don't get to or you don't have time, don't worry, I'll give you my phone number and my email address, and I'm here for the next couple of weeks before the deadline. So definitely please feel free to get in touch with me one-on-one, and I can have a more detailed conversation with you if that would be helpful. So yeah, both today, but don't think that it's your only opportunity, because you can definitely get in touch with me later on as well. Great, so this is our kind of strategic priorities at the moment, and it's kind of underpins the main principles of what we're trying to achieve through this grant round and the organisations that we're most likely to fund. It's probably worth saying that it's always quite competitive at BBC Children in Need, and now in this kind of context, certainly still remains quite competitive. So these are really the areas that organisations need to be including in the information they give us in the application in order to be successful. If you don't kind of do any of these areas at the moment, so for example, if you don't have a very strong culture around sharing power with children and people, if they don't inform your services, or you don't have any mechanisms for that, for example, it's probably something that would need to be worked on before an application would be successful. So these are the real kind of main areas of things we're looking for. So we want to prioritise funding to organisations who have got strong links to their community, have been adapting and changing. I'm sure that this is really, like, everyone over the last year has had to make significant changes and adaptations, but we want you to tell us about that, kind of what you've been doing in response over the last year to the needs and challenges that children and young people are facing. And yeah, really kind of evidencing, I guess, that you're best placed in your community, that you have credible community links, that you're well established, and that you have referral pathways and signposting in place, everything like that, so that you're really kind of embedded in the community. Sharing powers, yeah, again, I said about participation. So that's always something that Children in Need has been particularly focused on, and certainly in these grant programs, something that we want to see continue. So how do young people help to contribute and inform your organisational strategy, the delivery? How are they kind of active participants and leaders? We've also got a focus on diversity, equality, equity and inclusion, and this is also about prioritising organisations who have members of their community working with them and helping to support them as well, so whether they're led by community members, but yeah, this goes across all the protected characteristics as well. And then, yes, disadvantaged children, young people affected by COVID. I don't think anyone will have any kind of problems, unfortunately, evidencing that children, young people have been impacted significantly by COVID, which would be great to mention in your application, kind of the additional effects of that. Okay, so this is our differences framework. And in terms of kind of what's important, this is what we're looking for. And this is kind of one of the main areas of applications that tend to separate people who are successful and unsuccessful. So in the middle, where it says safe, happy and secure and reach their potential, that's what we children in need think that all children and young people deserve to have and to be, and that's our kind of mission statement. And then around the outside, these are the areas that we ask organisations to evidence they're making a difference in. So whether you're applying for a main grant or a small grant, I can talk about that a little bit later, or project funding or core organisational funding, no matter what kind of the specifics of the grant are, we'll always ask you to be thinking about these differences, and we'll always ask you for 3 differences. So it's really important on the difference section to be very clear, very specific, very focused. We don't want kind of really long, convoluted outcomes. We want them to be really quite kind of short and focused. So say, for example, it was around positive relationships. You might say children, young people through this work will have improved family relationships. And that would be it, very short, very simple. And we'll ask for 3. If you have any questions about these kind of differences or outcomes, this is maybe an area that you wanted to talk through a little bit in more detail about your work and how it might fit with these building blocks. Again, I'm totally happy to have a conversation with you afterwards about your organisation and the work that you're doing more specifically. Okay, so what grants are available at the moment? We've got open main and small grants. Both of these programs are multi-year, so they're both for up to 3 years. You can apply for 2 years if you like, but they're available for 3 years. You can apply for either a main grant or a small grant in this particular round. So you might already have a main grant or you might already have a small grant, and you can then apply for a new one in this round, but you can't put 2 applications in for this December round. You can choose main grants or small grants. It does take a few months to find out, so you'll hear about the funding decisions in April next year, and I'll come to talking a little bit about the process of how it works. So yes, we accept applications from new applicants and those that we already fund. It's definitely really important to us that we see applications from new applicants, and we definitely want to kind of build more relationships, and are really keen that the sector kind of understands that we definitely want new groups to come in as well. So don't let that put you off if you haven't applied before. It's definitely open to you, and we'd be more than willing to fund organisations that we haven't previously supported. The deadline is the 21st of December at 11:30 a.m. We used to have the deadline at midnight, and then realised that loads of organisations were working like right into the night, and don't really think that's fair around Christmas, so have made it 11:30 a.m. so that you can then do whatever else you want in the rest of the afternoon. Okay, you can apply if you are a not-for-profit, so we fund CIOs, CICs, registered charities. You don't need to be registered. Any organisations who are not-for-profit will fund within the UK. We have some minimum standards in grant making as well, and these are things that are the kind of basic eligibility to be able to receive a grant from us, and that applies to main grants and small grants. You can find out all of the information about what is kind of in those standards on our website. But just as a kind of general overview, it's things around governance. So, for example, you need to have at least three trustees. There's some stuff around safeguarding, so you need to have a safeguarding policy in place. And for our main grant program, you need to have a set of accounts, things like that. But you can have a look, as I said, on the website. And I'll also give you the details on the last slide for me, but for our operations team as well. And they are the ones who can have conversations about some of those more in-depth excuse me, things around governance as well. So if you had any questions about the standards, definitely do shout, but also I'll give you details that you'll know where to go if you had more questions. And yes, you make an application on our website. So it's all really easy. You go to the website, it's got details of the grants there. And then there's a button that says apply now. It takes you to your own portal, which you can then log into. If you're successful with the grant, you do your reporting through there, and it's all online, so hopefully quite easy. Any access requirements at all, though, do get in touch, and we're more than flexible around that. Okay, so for the main grants, it's more than £10,001 per year. So we don't have a kind of maximum amount, but realistically, we're probably going to be unlikely to award more than £40,000 a year, or £100,000 in total. So definitely kind of depends on your organization's turnover and your kind of various income streams in terms of what's proportionate to your organization. So it's up to you to kind of make a call about how much funding you think would be helpful. But yeah, this is the kind of rough parameters that we have in place. And for our main grants program, your organisation must have been active for at least 3 years. So that goes back to what I was saying a little bit about the kind of track records. This isn't the case, though, for small grants. So if you're a newer organisation, then small grants is still open to you. Yeah, and small grants is up to £10,000 a year again. So it could be, £30,000 in total, 10,000, 10,000, 10,000 a year for 3 years. And this program is slightly more where kind of geared towards a smaller amount of money making a bigger difference. So perhaps you have some work where you think that £10,000 would really enable you to reach more young people or develop your work or trial new ways of working, something like that. I think when we're talking about big difference, so for example, it's probably unlikely that if an organisation had a £2 million turnover, we would award £10,000 a year towards general running costs. That's kind of not really the spirit of the programme. It's more about, finding a particular piece of work where you think that £10,000 a year would make a difference, and then putting in an application to us for that. Small grants as well is also a good kind of introduction to us. So thinking about kind of how we work and our expectations and how our grant funding kind of operates. Often we find organisations who put in a small grant application, then deliver some work around that for a few years, and it can be a good kind of segue into having a main grant as well. So yeah, something to think about in terms of small grants. It's kind of standard eligibility. Again, there's more on the website, and I think you'll be really familiar with this from other funders as well, what you can't apply for. So statutory work. We don't do capital funding at all at Children in Need, so no buildings. We don't do individuals funding, or work that has started before the grant's given. So you've got 12 months from the date that we award the funding. So for this round, for example, it closes in December. We'll communicate decisions next year, and you've got 12 months from then to start your work, but we won't fund work that's already finished and you're looking to cover the costs now. We're saying as well that we don't fund projects during school time without a clear reason. There definitely can be lots of clear reasons, and later in the Q&A, if it's helpful, I can give some examples of the reasons. But if it just kind of suits you better or is easier to do work in school time, taking young people out of school, and there isn't a clear rationale for why that's in the young people's best interest, it's less likely to be successful. Okay, this is a pretty big one in terms of some changes that have happened at Children in Need over the last year. So you can apply for project delivery. That is what we've always done for the last 40 years or however long we've been around. It's been project funding, so very kind of discrete funding towards particular pieces of work. We definitely still will fund that. More than happy to fund specific projects where you know that you're doing some work and you're looking for funding particularly towards that service, more than fine. But the newer change is that we're also providing funding towards day-to-day organisational running costs. So really, I think kind of it come around in response over the last year. We know that people in the sector, we know that voluntary groups need this kind of funding to support their stability. But we did it for the first time in our COVID-19 response funding, which is called the Next Steps programme, earlier in the year. And we've got commitment now from our trustees that we're going to carry on for the next few rounds at least, providing organisational running cost funding. So you might think, okay, Children Need don't do that. This might be a bit risky to apply for that because it's not something that we're kind of used to or historically do. But you can trust me, we're committed to it, and we want to fund organisational running costs. We want to give organisations that kind of flexibility. We know that it's going to be quite hard. It definitely has been over the last year, but it's going to continue to be really hard to say we will run a Tuesday football club for the next 3 years. Who knows? So we definitely want to support organisations to be able to use the funding that we give them really flexibly, and we think one of the best ways of doing that is through organisational running costs. Okay, so here's the application process. Lots of words, but I'll just kind of run you through the basics, which is for the application, yep, you use the portal, go on the website, submit your application online. We will email you to let you know when the application has gone in. This might sound basic, but do make sure you get the email, because there has been occasions where people think they've submitted the application and they haven't, and then it hasn't gone through to assessment. So it's really important, make sure that you get the email acknowledgement. If you've got the email, brilliant. If you don't, then check with us, because that there might have been some kind of glitch, and it's just the worst when people think that they've submitted and they haven't. So check for that email. And then we will do an initial review of all the applications at that stage. You can see here it says that in the initial review, we'll be looking for a balanced portfolio at a local level. And this is a little bit kind of towards what Dan alluded to earlier with our particular funding focus in Harrow. So across Children Need, across the whole of the UK, we've been looking at our funding portfolio and seeing where we're kind of invested and where our grant funding is going. And then in local teams, so from the London team, we've been doing it in London, looking really specifically at where our investment is and trying to identify areas that we want to have more of a focus. So Harrow is one of those areas for us. We're not funding as much in Harrow proportionally compared to the rest of London and compared to the child poverty data. So we definitely want to encourage more applications from Harrow. We would love to be funding more in Harrow. So when we're looking at those applications at an initial review, certainly we will be looking at the quality of the organisation and the work. That's always the most important thing. But we'll also be prioritising some particular areas that we're looking to increase our portfolio, and Harrow is one of those areas. So good news for you guys. And then, yes, if your application goes through to the next stage, an assessor will call you. They will have a phone call in more detail about some specific things. A lot of it's around safeguarding, which is one of the things that Children Need is super hot on, and some further questions about your application. From there, it then goes to a regional advisory committee, and we've got a whole bunch of independent external experts who sit on our committees from the voluntary sector and kind of range of backgrounds, mostly voluntary sector though, and they collectively make decisions with us, the staff team, on the applications that we're going to recommend to the trustees for funding. Then there's the final decision, and that will be in April next year. So as I said, yeah, it does take a couple of months to go through. You can request feedback on your application, definitely worth doing. You can get in touch with us and someone in the London team will have a detailed conversation with you about your application. once it's gone through these stages if it's not successful. So definitely worth doing that. Okay, so yeah, once again, these are the key dates. The applications have already gone live. You can look at the website, you can see everything there now. There is also on the website some guidance alongside the application form. It's always pretty good, but this year I think it's really good because for every question that you're answering, the guidance will kind of match that and give you a little bit more insight in exactly what we're looking for. So if there's a question you think like, not really sure exactly what they're getting at with that, or what kind of things are they trying to tease out, then have a look at the guidance alongside it as well, because it will hopefully give you a bit of a steer. So that's all live already on the website. Now you can start the portal, you can start your application. As I said, the deadline is the 21st of December at 11:30. And then, yeah, the calls from the assessor will be in January and February if your application goes to that stage, and it will be decisions in April. The next round after this will be in the spring as well. So if you don't get an application in for December, then we'll be running a very similar program where we're also offering core organisational funding and 3-year multi-grants that will open next year as well. But for this round, the decisions will be communicated to you in April. And that is it. So on the bottom here, I can share it in the chat as well, is my email address and my phone number. The email address at the top, pudseygrants@bbc.co.uk, that is for my colleagues in the operations team. So yeah, as I said, with like the minimum standards, and if there was any kind of really specific questions you wanted to ask, anything technical about the portal, I definitely can't help you with anything technical. So for stuff like that, get in touch with Pudsey Grants. But if it's anything about London strategy, Harrow, any questions on the application form, you know, if you wanted to ask what kinds of things we're looking for, anything like that, get in touch with me.
Daisy,
That's it. Thanks, Dan.
So much. We are going to be sending the slides out, so obviously those emails will hit your inboxes because of that time date. We'll try and get it this week, so you've got those emails straight. Thanks, Daisy. We're going to come back to you with questions. You probably have been keeping an eye on the questions because some of them were being answered as you were talking. But so please, everyone, keep asking questions on the Q&A, and we'll try and get to as many as possible. But so Daisy, if you want to turn your camera off for a minute, and I'd like to introduce Debbie and Erik from John Lyon's charity, who's now going to give us a whirlwind tour of what JLC have got in store over the next period of time for us in Harrow.
Here we go. Can you hear me and see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes, okay, lovely. Well, hello everyone. I'm Debbie, Grants Communications Officer at John Lyon's charity, and with me is Erik, who's our Senior Grants and Public Policy Manager. So we're just going to rattle through this one so we can get to the Q&A, but if you do have any questions, like Dan says, if you pop them in the Q&A box, we'll do our best to get around to you or answer you later. So very quickly, we're going to be looking about who we are and then our eligibility criteria, grant funds, how to apply, and sort of looking ahead to the future. So John Lyon's charity then, we are a charitable trust that gives grants to organisations that support children and young people up to the age of 25 or up to 30 if they are disabled. We give grants in 9 boroughs of North and West London, which you can see on the map there. And to date, since 1991, we've given over £140 million, which at the minute is working out as about £12 million a year. So we give grants to registered charities and organisations with automatic charitable status, like state schools with an open admissions policy. And we're really big advocates of grassroots organisations, as many of you know. And where national charities are applying to us, they need to demonstrate that they have a track record and reputation of delivery within the charity's beneficial area. So John Lyon's charity works to increase the life chances of children and young people through education. And when we say through education, we're talking about it in really the broadest sense of the term. And here you can just see a flavour of 9 areas that we internally look at, but really it's everything from arts and early years to emotional well-being and youth clubs. So just looking at the sorts of things we can fund then. Similarly to Children in Need, we're not funding capital at the minute, but here you can see that we do core costs, salary costs, direct project costs. We have apprenticeships running. We can fund equipment costs where equipment is a part of wider project delivery. So for example, if you have a sports project and you need some footballs, for example, in order to deliver that project, but it does need to be proportional. We would predominantly expect to be funding salaries and delivery, and also capacity building. You can find out more about that via our website, or feel free to ask us later. So we're just going to look at 4 main grants funds for the purposes of this presentation. The big one is our main grants fund. So these grants are considered 3 times a year by a trustee in March, June and November. These grants are awarded for up to 3 years in length, and although there is no maximum grant amount that you can apply for, I would say the average grant is around 20 to 30k, but of course we've got smaller and larger grants than that. If you do want to have a look at some of the grants we've awarded recently, there's quite a lot on our website, and then on top of that you can have a look in the back of our annual report, which lists all the grants we're given each year. And as it says there, these grants are monitored annually. If you are applying to most of our grants funds really, we do recommend you start the process about 6 months in advance, just to avoid disappointment. Our grants rounds, as you can imagine, they do fill up. So 6 months is what's advised. Similarly to our main grants fund, our Schools in Partnership fund is for large grants. So here there is a cap of 50k, and this operates on the idea of clusters of schools, so groups of about 3 to 6 schools on average, forming a partnership where they can buy in a service from the voluntary sector and create an economy of scale by doing that. As previously mentioned, these are capped at 50k, and like main grants, they are considered 3 times a year. These grants are designed to help schools buy in services at a better cost to support their neediest pupils. And within that, we found that an awful lot of these grants are going towards emotional wellbeing projects over the last few years. And actually our expenditure within that area we found has increased about 9-fold in as many years. Oops. Here we go, I'm back. So small grants then. So our small grants are up to 5k. They last for 1 year, and usually you'll find these, similarly to Children in Need, to be a gateway into our main grants fund. Particularly for newer organisations, we might direct you to the small grants fund in the first instance, so that we can familiarise ourselves with your work, and likewise you can familiarise yourself with the way in which we work and our reporting, our questions, etc. Throughout. These applications are considered roughly every other month, but we do recommend, as always, getting in there in advance, since we can't fund retrospectively. So our School Holiday Activity Fund, or SHAF, is our fund. So this fund isn't designed to have really deep, impactful stuff. It's about the value of young people, children, having fun in the holidays, and making sure that they have opportunities to do so. So these grants are up to £4,000 for 1 year, and it's of note that your grant can cover multiple school holidays within a 1 year period. You can apply for up to 3 years consecutively before you're then asked to take a break of a year. We have different deadlines for each of the school holidays, which never change year to year, so you can go on our website to find those. They're all written really clearly. If you ever have any difficulties finding this information, do feel free to drop us a line. We have contact information at the end, and our admin team and ourselves will be able to help you. So within the School Holiday Activity Fund, you can apply for holiday drop-in activities, arts activities, sport, family activities, and so on. It's worth bearing in mind, though, that with all of these grant funds, obviously in these COVID times, things have changed slightly. So what we've done is we've introduced, as part of the application process to all of them, an alert level delivery plan, which coincides with the National Youth Agency's alert levels: red, amber, green, yellow. You'll all be very familiar with them. And that's an opportunity for you to tell us how you'll deliver within each of the different alert levels. So we know there's a plan in case things change or there's another lockdown or whatever that might be. I'll hand you over to Erik now.
Hello, everyone. I'm very aware of the time, so I'll be brief. Hopefully, everything will be there, though. So just some general rules about what we fund and don't fund. So first, that is basically that we are not a perpetual funder. Although a number of you had funds a number of times over the years. So we do have longer term relationships with organizations, as you well know. We do ask you to wait for a year between each grant program. What we do say, though, and this has been re-emphasized by COVID, is that if you are in crisis, if there are issues, we do not want you to close. Do get in touch with us if that is the case. So whilst it is a 3-year and then a one-off, 1 year off and then another 3 years after potentially, you have to get in touch with us if there's an issue. What we don't want to see is what we saw in 2010, 11, 12, when a number of organizations that we knew for years suddenly disappeared. And so that is the worst possible outcome. The other things are kind of self-explanatory. We don't fund retrospectively. It has to be a project that has to happen in the future rather than what's already happened. There's only one grant per organization. Again, this is with modifications, but essentially that is true. The only thing we do have as an exception to this is the School Holiday Fund, SHAF, which is in addition to a main grant. If you fail to get a grant from us or declined by the board, you have to wait 2 years before you can reapply. As Debbie re-emphasized, our focus is local groups. We like smaller groups. We like groups that, it matters to them what the delivery is at the local level. They're people who care about the local area. Not to say that large nationals don't care about the local area, but our priority is still for those local organizations. If you're a supplementary school, we of course advise you to work with your local supplementary school forum. In the case of Harrow, that's run by Securing Success, where there is a program where you can access funding and support and capacity building from NRCSC and from Securing Success, funded by John Lyons Charity. We also require you to get the qualities framework by the NRC, which has been revamped in the last couple of years. So do make sure you have the quality framework if you were to apply to us as a main grant. So whilst there are lots of different things you can get as a supplementary school through small grants and consortia building, you could also apply to us as a main grant. If you're a youth club, we want you to get the London Youth Quality Mark. And also there's some key issues here, which a number of you will have bumped up against in the past. We only fund registered charities, essentially. And so if you are to apply for a grant using someone else's charity number, that's not ideal. There are ways about this, and I think if there are problems with this, we can work with our YPF partners about how to find this, to work with this, but we don't do conduit funding. We don't let people borrow charity numbers. Debbie, can I have the next slide, please? So a very brief rundown of how the application process works. So the only program we do, which is the one-off application form, is the School Holiday Activity Fund. It's the only one that also has application deadlines. The deadlines are based around our holidays. So in order to get the summer holiday program, you have to apply in good time beforehand in order to be eligible for that. So that's a one-step process which is done through the portal. For two-stage application processes are basically all other grants. So whether they be the main grants, the small grants, or the schools in partnership, or any other grant we do, they are all 2 stages. So the first stage is a kind of initial proposal, an outline. It doesn't have to be more than a page or 2, just basically saying who, what, where, when, and what is it they want to do. And I think the thing I always say to everyone over many years now is that all grant making and application form filling is who are you, what do you want to do, why are you doing it, where are you doing it, when you're doing it, how much will it cost. But the most important of all of these W's is the what. What are you actually going to do? If we give you £25,000 a year for 3 years, what will you deliver as a result of that? And spend the most of your time doing the what. Generally, John Lyons Charity, because we are a place-based funder where everyone works very tightly in the local area and understand the local concerns, the why is important, but the what is more important. Generally, we know some of the issues and have worked with you over some years for that. So, the initial proposal is basically a summary, a budget, timescales, and applications for the first stage can be done at any time throughout the year. When we get the proposal, we then usually have an initial assessment where we meet you, and we like to think of ourselves at John Lyons Charity as the We do grant making by walking around, that we kind of visit you. We do I like to call the Honda model of grant making, visiting projects, seeing what the work is, understanding what the need is. Of course, in these COVID times, that is not going to be a physical face-to-face meeting, sadly. It will be a site visit or a kind of Zoom or Teams call. Sometimes we use advisors for specific issues. We bring them in to work with the grants managers to assess an application. Chief to this is really to engage with your local young people foundation, understand how you can work together with other organizations locally. The YPFs are there to support you. They were established by John Lyons Charity to be that kind of local capacity building structure, to understand local need, for us to have an even better understanding of what locally happens and how they can support you to do that. So they're there to help you. Debbie. Yes, so stage 2. So if you've gone past the kind of initial proposal stage and you're successful with this, we will then send you the application form as a link. So again, no application forms per se. They're all online on our John Lyons Charity portal. But essentially, they are the same application forms as we've had for a number of years. There are deadlines to the second stage application process, but they will be informed of them when you are given the second stage application form. So unlike Children Need, we don't publish the deadlines. The only deadlines are when you get to the point of filling the application for second stage out. A very brief bit about our response to COVID. So some of you will know that we have a very strong and close relationship with London funders for many years. We did a piece of work 3 years ago on Grenfell, when Grenfell being around the corner from where our office is based in Kensington, Chelsea. And we created a portal together with London funders and the Tute Trust to look at how we can get as many applications as possible funded during the crisis that was the Grenfell Tower fire. We then been pushing and pushing for 3 years to get more funder collaboration for people to work together and how to find ways to make it easier for you as applicants to get funding in an emergency. This led then to the London funders COVID response called the London Community Response, which is again kind of an online portal. People apply in one place. There are 65 funders who work together to assess applications and fund as many as we can through this process. We went early and signed up to the We Stand with the Sector statement from London funders, which is about being flexible and engaging with our grant funding projects to deliver that. We've been doing a variety of media blitzes throughout the period. And as you can see here, we've engaged heavily with the National Youth Agency to help design the guidance, which we've incorporated into all our work, both at London funders, at John Lyons Charity. But generally, our main thrust has been via the collaborative process of London Community Response. We are now currently in wave 4, and there's a wave 5, and I think it's on the slide after that, isn't there, Debbie? Yep, there we are. So wave 1 was emergencies, wave 2 was delivering differently, so converting your youth club to deliver online services, for example. Wave 3 was about longer term renewal, and then of course things went to pot again, and we then launched wave 4, which is again is emergencies and food and essentials. So trying to provide a service at that level for that. Wave 5 will be in January, and we are launching that very soon. So if you are thinking about applying for food and emergencies, do apply for wave 4. The deadline's Thursday, but don't apply if you don't want to deliver food and emergencies work. This round is not for funding, the crisis that is in children and youth services. It's for funding COVID-related work. Wave 5, however, in the new year will be more about longer-term sustainability of organizations and trying to provide good quality youth service at the local level. So do apply for that. Just a brief thing at the end about us. So we are continuing our work, normal work that we do. So whilst we've been doing work around emergencies and collaborative funding, we also have been running our funding rounds as usual. So we had funding rounds in June, and we had one a couple of weeks ago, and we're going in March. So we have 3 rounds of funding a year, and they've been running continuously throughout COVID, and they will carry running as normal. So we are looking at expanding our work really rather than shrinking our work, and hopefully you will know more about this very soon. But we are wanting to do as much as we possibly can to support our community organizations and children and people in this really quite tricky time. That's it. So let's do the questions.
Thank you, guys. That was great. Daisy, please join us. Adila, join us. I know I've got some, but I'm going to hand over to Adila because I know she's been typing away. So if there are some questions that have been asked, and Daisy's been able to answer them through the Q&A. So if you click on the answered ones, if you just want to have a quick look at those, if anyone's waiting, they might be useful as well. But Adila, what question would you like to ask, or questions? You're muted.
Sorry, I'm muted. Right. Thanks, guys. Great presentation. We've got a question from Rachel. That this is for Daisy. When you talk about the main grants amount, she was wondering if there's more guidance about what kind of amount is reasonable to apply for. Is it a percentage of turnover, or if you're applying for core costs, for example?
Yeah, I mean, there's no hard and fast rule. We don't have something that's, particularly written down in guidance. I think we'd probably have questions if the request was for more than 50% of your turnover. I think we would have, concerns about sustainability and wanting to see that there were kind of different income streams in place. Again, you can ask us if you had a specific amount in mind. Just ask someone in the team. But yeah, there aren't any hard and fast rules. Really, it's yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Daisy. Just leading on from that, I know there's an email for Children in Need that you gave, and your own email. Is it invited or encouraged for people to, before they fill in, obviously a very long application form, to have a chat, talk through the proposal with you guys?
Yeah, definitely. More than happy to, for sure. Yeah, just to reiterate, the PUDSI grants email address is for technical stuff, and they can help with those minimum standards that I talked about, because that applies kind of across the UK. But yeah, anything more specific about kind of outcomes or participation, or what we're particularly looking to prioritise in London, absolutely, yeah, do get in touch, because I think it's worth saying again as well, it is quite competitive, and you're right, the form does take an amount of time to complete, and I totally appreciate that. So would very much rather the organisations got in touch if they weren't sure, to kind of save themselves doing a whole heap of work. So if you have any questions, for sure, get in touch. Yeah, no worries.
Brilliant, thanks, Daisy. There's a question for Erik and Debbie now about the London community response, saying that if you've applied for wave 4, can you also apply for wave 5, as it's so soon after? And is there an amount available per organisation in wave 5? So there's 3 questions. I'll ask you one at a time. Go for that one first. Can you apply for both?
Shall I? So essentially, wave 5 is being designed as we speak, and there are meetings this week to hammer out the final details. But just to kind of clarify that the way the process works is it's a portal where you apply one place. That one application doesn't get seen by 65 funders. They have to then participate and fund the things that they can. So there's no, you don't get a grant from London Community Response. You don't get turned down by London Community Response. It is it's a portal where you apply, and people then look at your application forms. The chances of you getting funding are much, much, much higher than it is from applying elsewhere, because nowhere else would you get an application form to 65 funders in one go. With all that said, I chair the children and young people part of the London Community Response, and we have been looking at applications recently, and we've had a large number of declines. Organisations that didn't make it onto the portal in the first place. And the main reason for that is that I think, with all grant making, I've been a grant maker for 18 years. The rule number 1 is read the guidance. Rule number 2 is read the guidance. And I think people are spending time writing application forms and then being turned down because they didn't read the guidance fully. And I think that's, if there's one plea I have, is that we've said in wave 4 that apply for food and emergencies, and people applied for generic youth work and core funding and rent. And whilst that's really important, I really want to fund things like that. What John Lyon's charity wants to do is fund core costs, and I'm very pleased that Children in Need are doing the same thing. But that don't apply there. apply where they say that you're going to do that. So I think the rule is read the guidance, and then if you then think you are able to deliver what they say they do, apply for it. Your chances of getting money for food are extremely high. If you are an organization that wants to do food distribution in Harrow, you will get money for it almost certainly. But if you can apply for a rent because you are running out of money, you won't, and it will be wasting your time to do that.
Thank you very much, Erik. That's really helpful. And just about wave 5, is it going to be for longer than 6 months delivery?
We don't know, but it might be. And so, I mean, very soon we'll find out, because the way we program is that we have to get the Greater London Authority, John Lyons Charity, City Bridges, and all the others to agree to this. And generally, there'll be someone who says we can fund for 12 years. So even if a organization or a funder says we can do for 12 months, that doesn't mean that everyone will do, but there'll probably be a chance for longer term funding, yes.
Okay, brilliant. And one more for you guys. Can somebody apply for funding for projects in different boroughs at the same time? So could they apply for Harrow if they're already funded to deliver in Barnet, for example?
Is this John Lyons Charity, sorry, rather than elsewhere?
Yes, for John Lyons.
So the rule is going to have one grant at a time. But we have made exceptions in the past. So as an example, which is very close to home for you guys, there was a Home Start Harrow. It closed, which was a shame. Home Start Barnet then applied for a grant to deliver specific services running a Home Start in Harrow, essentially, and we allowed that. So I think that whilst the main rule is you can only have one grant, John Lyons Charity is nothing else. We are very focused on there being a provision for children and people in the 9 boroughs working. And I think therefore we are able to negotiate with our trustees to find solutions for this. Because if we feel that a borough has missing key service elements, then we will try to find solutions to that. But as a general rule, you can have one grant. You can apply for a grant that does work through 3 boroughs. So you can apply for one grant that will work in Brent, Barnet, and Harrow, for example, and that's perfectly fine. But one grant at a time.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks, Erik.
Is it my turn? Can I ask a couple of questions?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
My first one's for Daisy. Daisy, let's put you under the microscope first. So as one of the biggest things at the moment is people keeping their lights on. So we know that, and it's great that you said you're going to do a core grant. So 2 questions around core grants. One is, if they're applying for the project, what at the moment does it mean to also add a core element? Because I think costs to organizations have gone up from using digital, costs more, from being able to work more partnerships. All of these costs have really pushed back. And so the charity sector that was already very lean has then got massive pressures to do all these other things. So what would you advise a charity that is applying for project, but is definitely going to be putting core costs? Is there any guidance you would give to make sure that they're applying for enough to actually be able to deliver?
Yeah, so the first thing is that I wouldn't necessarily just limit the application to a project plus full cost recovery, plus 10-20%, put in 100% organizational costs. That's fine. Put an application in for £30,000 totally towards your running costs. That's the kind of funding that we want to do. The first time that we did it, as I said, was kind of earlier in the year because of COVID. And we offered it, but to be honest, very few organizations actually applied for running costs, and where they did, they put in that kind of additional amount. So yeah, most commonly, I think people put in about 10-15% extra on top of their project. That was fine. We definitely funded that. We funded that across the board, and there was no limit on that. If you wanted to put in an extra 15, 20, 25%, that's more than fine. But I would say don't stop there. Put in your whole application towards your organizational running costs, because that's really what we want to do, and that's what we think gives you the most kind of flexibility and the best chance of success to be able to use it in an evolving way as the kind of picture unfolds over the next 3 years.
That leads me to my second question. So for those organizations that will be asking for a core grant for the whole thing, famously, what's very hard sometimes to do is to sell yourself as an organization, because most applications are designed to sell a project, to sell, like you're trying to change the lives of someone in society that's struggling. So when you're actually trying to also say, let's say if I was applying, I'm the chief exec, and it's really important also to apply me. I can't sell you my direct piece of work to the end user. Is there any advice on how to encourage charities to think through how they can apply for the whole thing to be 100% for those kind of really core costs that maybe don't always look exciting on paper? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Did you want to say something, Eric?
Yes, please. I mean, John Lyon's charity, of course, has done core funding for a very long time, and we have this question a number of times, recently from Newdown. But the thing is, what you have to think about is, the questions like, what is your project? If you're asking for core costs for an organization, the organization is your project. So, what does Young Harrow Foundation do? And tell us everything you do, because if you're asking for the chief exec salary for a project, it's impossible to deliver the work that Young Harrow Foundation do without a chief executive, for example. So, when you sell that kind of application form, it is about, these are the stuff we do. These are all inherently part of a total application. And so forget about the outputs of what the chief exec will do. I think this is the thing we keep telling them. Well, the actual outputs of this piece of core work, like you'll pay for £10,000 worth of gas, electricity, etc. Like, that's not the key thing. The key thing is, what does the Wish Centre do? What does Watford Football Club do? And just talk about that. Don't talk about project at all.
Just to clarify, everyone, I'm not actually applying because I use myself just for a conflict of interest. We are not applying for either of these, so we are not your competitor, just to clarify. I was just using the example. Daisy, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, so I mean, similarly, we still want to know what your organisation does across the board. It's just speaking slightly more broadly. So we definitely want to understand what work you're undertaking and, kind of what that means for children and young people. But the materials will give you the opportunity to speak about a range of services rather than just one. I would say my advice on this, though, is that we still definitely remain focused on those differences for young people, like in the wheel thing that I showed. So we want to understand the link between the needs or the challenges of the young people, the work you're doing, and the difference that it's going to make. And that's been, really kind of easy to package as a project. Maybe with core costs, it's kind of zoomed out more, but we still want to understand it. So when you're talking about the differences, there's a section that's like, says something like, how does your work bring about these differences? You can just tell us a couple of services. You could say, for example, children will have increased self-confidence through our weekly reading clubs and our one-to-one and our peer mentoring. So just zoom out slightly, but still keep that focus there of the needs, the work, and the differences made.
One of my suggestions, and Adela, if there's any other questions, I'll hand back to you in a second, is please maybe get in touch if you're doing core grants, because I know, Eric, we had a chat about it. It is such an important thing, but it's sometimes, as someone writing, quite hard to get across that balance between this is the impact we're trying to make and this is why the core costs are so important, often in quite a short amount of information. So I really would advise, if you are thinking one of those core grants, please speak to either Daisy, Eric, or Debbie, because I think it's just worth just having a touch base with a funder before you spend just ages applying.
I think a crucial. Sorry, Debbie.
Sorry. Something else that's just worth adding there is that when it is part of our assessment process that once we receive a proposal from you, we're having a conversation with you. So a lot of the time what you'll find is, if you are struggling to get that on paper, we'll be able to have that conversation with you and really pull out these things. And we also allow time within our application process as a relational funder that we can pick up the phone and ask you those questions. If, say, for example, something has come up in the meeting that we had that we think would be particularly useful for you to put in, we might give you a nudge to just put it in there for us. So we do allow time to have those conversations if you are struggling.
Adela, is there any more questions? You are muted at the moment, just so you're aware. You're muted, Adela.
Sorry, I'm muted again. Sorry, it was on the Harrow priorities, Daisy, just quickly, that I know the December deadline is quite soon. Will that continue into the spring and to the next round, or is it just for this round that you're prioritising, Harrow?
Yeah, I definitely imagine so. It's ongoing work that we're doing to look at kind of where our funding's reaching, and that kind of will be an evolving piece as we kind of make more grants and things change. But yeah, we're certainly committed to funding in Harrow, and I don't think that will change for the next round. I'll just say as well, we have a couple of thematic priorities as well as geographical priorities, and so we're particularly looking at the moment around work with young people experiencing domestic abuse, and young people who are care experienced and those experiencing homelessness. So if you're working in any of those spaces as well and you wanted to have a chat, get in touch with me as well.
Well, so that we finish absolutely on time, thank you so much to all of you, to Daisy, to Erik, to Debbie for sharing some great insight. We will get those presentations to you ASAP, so you've got their emails. Please use it. Please connect with them. Except for that, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Have a fantastic rest of the day, and we will see you all soon. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.